it crushed me for quite a long time.
The whole process is so demeaning to one's personal and professional well-being that it is really appalling. And I know people who have quit the practice of medicine. I know 2 people who have committed suicide over being sued.
Nobody warned me about this. Nobody warns any of us about this. Somebody needs to warn us about this type of pressure and pain that we're going to experience in practice.
I took everything really personally. Like, this was a reflection upon me, that this was my failing.
I absorbed a lot of internal anger. I didn't even know how to talk about it.
The voices you have just heard are all physicians who agreed to speak candidly about their experiences with litigation and litigation stress. Their experiences are not unique. Most physicians who are sued, and most physicians are, at some point, sued, experience some degree of litigation stress. Many experience significant stress and symptoms of malpractice stress syndrome, which we'll discuss further in a moment. We as physicians have a very hard time discussing litigation openly, especially the impact of litigation on the individual. You likely have many colleagues who have been sued, but you may not know about it. They've been told by their lawyers not to talk about it, or they feel embarrassed, or perhaps find the experience too difficult to talk about openly. Whatever the reason, our secrecy about the experience leads to a culture where physicians who are sued subsequently feel even more isolated and ashamed, contributing to the inherent stress of the experience, even though the great majority of physicians will be sued, and they can't all be bad doctors. Although there are many practical things to learn about the process of litigation, today we're just focusing on litigation stress itself. I'll mention some practical points, but refer you to other resources for further learning. Let's start with a few facts. As I mentioned, over 3/4 of all physicians can expect to be sued in their lifetimes, possibly up to 90%, depending on your source and your specialty. For emergency medicine, about 75% of physicians are sued annually. The chances of having your personal assets at risk are very, very slim, although plaintiffs' attorneys may threaten that. The malpractice climate, the likelihood that you'll get sued, the payout if you lose, who can testify against you as an expert, all sorts of variables, will vary from state to state, so it makes sense to look at the rules in a state before you decide to practice there. And overall, less than 10% of cases go to trial, but if most physicians do at some point get sued, a fair number of physicians have to go through that experience. So let's talk about the stress that this process creates. It's very real, and it will challenge you. Many physicians find the process career-changing, even life-changing. We fear the process before we even enter it, and yet we spend very little time preparing for or learning about it in our training. But perhaps if we start talking about it openly and even training for it as the occupational hazard it is for most of us, we can destigmatize it and find out how best to help ourselves and our colleagues when they're affected. After all, we know that a good way to manage anxiety about a process is to practice it. That's why we simulate difficult, even rare procedures. So we should be spending more time on this topic, as eventually it will affect most of us in one way or another. You may have had some training in risk management strategies. Obviously, if you practice good medicine, stay up to date, you lower your risk of actually committing malpractice. It is a good idea to build rapport with your patients and their families. Make sure your hospital protocols are reasonable and that you document why you deviate from them when necessary. Don't get angry at your patients. Spend as much time as you can with them. Sit down to seem unhurried. Listen well. Instruct clearly. You can do all of these things and more and still be at risk for litigation because you have had a bad outcome. We should acknowledge that adverse events and bad outcomes themselves take a strong psychological toll. We understand intellectually that bad outcomes are usually not due to negligence of any kind, and yet they affect us emotionally in a range of ways. We feel deeply for the patient and their families, and we also may experience guilt or an understandable fear of repercussions. We may feel shock at the outcome, and it may deeply psychologically affect us. We may feel shame, whether or not we can assure ourselves that we did everything that we should have. We may have trouble with our feelings of being worthy of our position, and we may have obsessive recounting of the events of the case that stays with us for weeks, even months. And we wonder with dread, will we be sued? I have 3 important points to make. Point number 1, being named in a suit does not mean you are negligent. Point number 2, you can follow all of the risk management rules and still be sued. And point number 3, you may feel in hindsight you could have managed your case better or made different choices. You may feel, frankly, that you made an error. You are not alone in that at all. It happens to every physician, and you need to forgive yourself. In some cases, an adverse event will lead to litigation. You may be completely blindsided when you're served, as many physicians are. Being served is considered an acute stress event to which there's an expected psychological response, a normal psychological response. The timeline for working through it varies from person to person, but expect that there will be some sort of outcry or large emotional response followed by an effort at denial, then a period where the case and your reaction to being named has frequent intrusion into your thoughts. You may sleep poorly. You may find it hard to concentrate at work or enjoy yourself with others. The working through happens over time, and eventually you'll accept what's happening and be able to focus on what needs to be done to get through the litigation process. However, in any of these steps, you can get hung up, and this can lead to various maladaptive behaviors. So, how can you start to work through the process? After you contact your malpractice insurance carrier, they will assist you in finding an attorney and will arrange to meet with you in person. They'll likely have some support resources to offer you, and independent of that, there are a few things that you should know. You shouldn't discuss the details of your case with anyone but your attorney, although there are a few exceptions. However, you absolutely should talk to supportive family and friends and seek out colleagues who are familiar with the process. You'll find that reassurance of your value as a person and as a good physician is something that you'll be able to fall back on as time goes by. Also, it's helpful to read a book about the process. You might even consider doing this before you're ever named in the suit. Remember, knowledge about what's going to happen will help you manage your anxiety about the unknown. It's time to educate yourself. There are many good books out there. These are 3 of my favorites, which I've relied on heavily during my own experience with litigation. I also found this book helpful, but I find it a little hard to apply in practice. Okay, so back to the heavy stuff. Why is this so hard on us anyway? Part of it is the nature of physicians. We tend to be hard on ourselves, perfectionists who don't want to make mistakes or be perceived as having made a mistake. Society certainly doesn't help us out. They expect perfection from us as well. If you feel you've been unfairly blamed for an outcome, you may rightfully feel bitter or angry, as though your integrity is being attacked unfairly. We're also used to having control, and in this situation we have much less than we'd like. The world of litigation is foreign to most of us, and we find we need to rely on others to navigate it. Lawsuits take up a lot of time you'll never get back, and time you won't be paid for. You may feel isolated because you've been told not to talk about it. And you may feel your colleagues will think less of you, or that your reputation will be harmed, or that you could even face financial ruin as the result of a large jury verdict. And what's the end result of these factors? Litigation stress, which, again, is a normal response to an abnormal psychological stressor. You may experience trauma resulting in physical symptoms, chronic stress symptoms, depression, anxiety, difficulty concentrating, even a strain on your relationships. Those you live with may suffer with you. Another reason that talking about what's happening to you is important. Those physical symptoms could include fatigue, having a hard time concentrating, sleep disturbances, GI symptoms, chest pain, panic, palpitations, or other anxiety-related symptoms. In short, those symptoms that you recognize in your patients who are experiencing psychological stressors can all become familiar to you. As I said, some response is natural, but what isn't? When does it become pathologic? Malpractice stress syndrome is on a continuum with the expected litigation stress, and it can encompass severe symptoms such as increased physical symptoms, severe depression and anxiety, and inability to perform duties at work. It can lead to substance abuse, ruined relationships, professional troubles, even suicidality. And yes, we do know of physician suicides directly related to the litigation process. It's heartbreaking, and it shouldn't happen. Although all of us are at risk for malpractice stress syndrome, what may increase that risk? Cases with very poor outcomes or death. Cases where physicians feel that they may have been at fault. Physicians who have underlying depression, anxiety, burnout, or substance abuse disorders are at higher risk. Females tend to experience more depressive symptoms, while higher numbers of males turn to substance abuse. High-stakes case with press involvement or punitive damages meant to punish the physician expressly can be very high-risk situations. There's a survey at a helpful site created by Louise Andrew, MD, JD, who has done much work in this arena. You can take it to gauge your risk, and you should 100% seek professional help if you feel you're having difficulty coping with this stress. Do not be ashamed, and do not wait. The litigation process, unfortunately, tends to drag on for years. The acute stress turns into a chronic one with acute exacerbations that need to be managed like a disease. Your guide in this process will be your attorney, so it's important to have one that you trust if you have say in the matter. Look at their record, their trial experience, and ask other physicians for references. Unless you have advanced knowledge of the law, you will need your attorney to do the behind-the-scenes work and prepare you for the deposition, the usual negotiations with the plaintiff's lawyers over time, perhaps a trial, which has its own set of stressors, including testifying in court, and coping with the sting and often the anger at expert witness testimony. And then there's the outcome, a verdict for you or for the plaintiff, or at any point before that, settlement is a possibility. Settling a case has its own psychological impact, but it's important to note a few things. There are many reasons a case may be settled. It may be the choice of your insurance carrier, or you may wish to settle due to fears of financial hardships or of a large verdict or threats of punitive damages. Settling does not mean you were negligent, but you may feel conflicted if you feel you've done nothing wrong. Some people choose to settle if a settlement is offered to avoid the further pain of proceedings. Through all of these proceedings, staying emotionally intact and whole asks a lot of a person. It requires grit, resilience, and coping strategies. Many of us feel that we're just barely hanging on for survival. What can we do? The first step, you should have someone to talk to about what you're going through, whether it's a friend, a peer, a counselor through a hospital program, or a professional therapist. You can find resources for understanding the litigation process and coping with it through professional societies such as ACEP or AAEM. Your insurance carrier or your hospital may also have resources, but it's important to seek professional help if you're suffering the symptoms of malpractice stress syndrome and they are severe. Educate yourself about the process. This will help alleviate some of the fear of the unknown. Some suggest making a list of positive things in your life or of your successes and referring to it often, as the process of litigation is essentially designed to rob you of your self-confidence. You are so much more than this one single case. Remind yourself that litigation really is about money. The way our system works, the medicine is an afterthought, sometimes completely besides the point. You'll learn that the process is more like a play or a pageant, and everyone has their role to play, including you. Being a good witness or giving a strong deposition is just like any other skill that you can learn with training. And when you've finished with the process, hopefully you're stronger for it and you can turn an eye to advocacy and helping others who are just entering the process. In addition to the books and professional societies I mentioned earlier, there are also 2 helpful websites that have many links to other resources for help. MDmentor.com was started by Dr. Louise Andrew, whom I mentioned earlier, who has written and spoken extensively on this topic. And physicianlitigationstress.org also has many helpful resources. Dr. Sarah Charles, the author of Adverse Events, Stress, and Litigation, is its senior advisor. Dr. Andrews challenges us as a profession to help deal with the challenge of litigation stress by replacing mystery with knowledge, replacing shame with confidence, providing insight into the players and the drama being enacted, and providing tools and strategies for combating the physical and emotional toll this process takes. One of my favorite pieces of advice comes from a psychologist who works with our hospital's peer-to-peer counseling program for physicians experiencing litigation. Her mantra, play, rest, escape. You will need to give yourself permission to make time for self-care, including finding ways to escape the burden of litigation and time to do the things you like to do, not just to work. If you know a colleague who's going through litigation, reach out to them more than once. Say something positive. And if you feel someone's at real risk, act. Get them help. Walk them there. Do whatever you need to do. Get involved with advocacy. If you've been through the process, serve as a peer mentor. And if you're a leader or in administration, provide physicians with active support, not avoidance or blame. Most importantly, remember that you are not alone in this. Many, many physicians have been in your shoes and know that what you are feeling is valid. But also there are role models of resilience out there. You will get through this process and be stronger for it if you know what you're up against, prepare yourself, and lean on others for support when you need it.